World War II wasn't just fought with tanks and rifles. It was also fought with catastrophic stupidity. This isn't about tactics. It's about the moments of sheer, unfiltered absurdity. We're talking about official plans to guide missiles with pigeons, a top-secret project to build an aircraft carrier from a giant iceberg, and a serious military proposal to lace Hitler's food with female hormones. Brace yourself for 32 of the dumbest and most bizarre true stories from the entire conflict. 1. At the peak of invasion anxiety during the Battle of Britain in 1940, the British government released guidelines on how to handle German paratroopers. Among the practical advice was a suggestion so mind-bogglingly British it feels like parody. Treat them firmly but kindly. Offer them tea, if you have any. This wasn't a joke. It perfectly captures a national obsession with civility, even when faced with an armed soldier dropping from the sky. The mental image of confronting a heavily armed Fallschirmjäger with a polite offer to put the kettle on is an absolute masterpiece of wartime absurdity. You have to wonder if they debated offering biscuits, too. 2. Britain's Special Operations Executive, or SOE, was essentially the weird gadget department for spies, and they cooked up some truly bizarre ideas. One of their most organic inventions was an explosive meticulously disguised as horse manure. The strategic genius here is undeniable. No one gives a second glance to a pile of dung on a country road or near a military checkpoint. Just imagine the development meetings. Right, lads, this batch isn't convincing enough, it needs more texture. Agents were supposed to casually drop these fecal bombs and walk away. The project, which we can only assume was internally nicknamed Operation Number 2, was never widely used, likely due to the sheer, stomach-turning awkwardness of handling it. 3. In a move that still feels like a fever dream, the United States Treasury Department recruited Donald Duck for the war effort. A 1943 Disney cartoon titled The Spirit of 43 was commissioned to convince Americans to pay their income taxes on time. The short film depicts Donald being torn between a frugal, responsible self and a wild, free-spending version of himself. The cartoon makes it crystal clear that paying your taxes was a direct patriotic act to fund the fight against the Axis. Using and perpetually enraged, pantsless waterfowl to lecture the nation on fiscal responsibility is perhaps the most wonderfully dumb piece of propaganda ever created. 4. Rudolph Hess, who was Hitler's own deputy Führer, decided to embark on what might be the most ill-conceived solo mission in history. In May 1941, he got it in his head that he, personally, could broker a peace deal with the United Kingdom. So he hopped into a Messerschmitt fighter jet and flew it all by himself from Germany to Scotland. After parachuting out, he landed awkwardly, sprained his ankle, and was immediately captured by a local farmer, armed with nothing more than a pitchfork. When Hitler found out, he was incandescent with rage, while the British were just completely baffled. They simply threw him in prison for the rest of his life, a fitting end to a truly terrible plan. 5. In February 1942, the city of Los Angeles collectively lost its mind in an event now known as the Battle of Los Angeles. Fueled by a cocktail of post-Pearl Harbor jitters and reports of mysterious objects in the sky, which were probably just weather balloons, absolute panic erupted. For several hours, the city's anti-aircraft batteries fired over 1,400 shells into the night sky at, well, nothing. The result of this self-inflicted light show of doom. 0 enemy aircraft were hit because there were none, but several civilians died from the falling shrapnel of their own military's shells. It was a terrifying and deeply embarrassing testament to the power of mass hysteria. 6. Both Germany and Japan tried to weaponize smooth-talking women on the radio. Broadcasters like Germany's Axis Sally and Japan's various Tokyo Rose personalities would play popular American music for Allied troops, but they'd interrupt the tunes with propaganda. They'd spread fake news about devastating Allied losses, hint that their wives and girlfriends back home were being unfaithful, and generally try to crush morale. While the idea was clever, the execution fell flat. Most GIs just tuned in for the music they missed from home and treated the propaganda parts as a running joke. It was like trying to stop an army with a really downbeat podcast. 7. The Nazi Lebensborn program, championed by SS leader Heinrich Himmler, was not only morally monstrous but also built on staggering scientific ignorance. The SS established special maternity homes where women deemed racially pure were meant to have children with SS officers. They genuinely believed they could selectively breed a master race of perfect Aryans, as if they were creating a new type of German Shepherd. This plan completely ignored the basic facts of human genetics, not to mention the roles of culture and education. It was a vile fantasy based on pseudoscience, treating human beings like prize-winning pumpkins in a grotesque state-run fair. 8. The BBC wasn't just broadcasting news and morale-boosting music to occupied Europe. It was a critical tool for espionage. Tucked inside what sounded like mundane personal announcements were cleverly coded messages for resistance cells. A seemingly random phrase like, "Jean has a new red hat," or a specific piece of music played at a certain time could be a signal to sabotage a railway line, confirm a supply drop, or warn of an impending Gestapo raid. This turned the simple act of listening to the radio into a high-stakes game of life and death, with secret orders flying through the airwaves right under the noses of the occupying forces. 9. Hitler's late war obsession with so-called Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons, was a strategically moronic decision. While things like the V-2 rocket and the Me-262 jet fighter were undeniably futuristic, they were a catastrophic drain on Germany's dwindling resources. Every scrap of steel and every skilled engineer dedicated to these unreliable, too little too late projects was one less conventional tank, rifle, or airplane for the front lines. They were basically pouring money into a few flashy high-tech prototypes that had almost no impact on the war's outcome, instead of mass-producing the proven, effective weapons they desperately needed. It was a classic case of prioritizing cool-looking propaganda over sound military logic. 10. This sounds like a cartoon, but I assure you it was a real funded American military program, Project Pigeon. The brainchild of famed psychologist B.F. Skinner, the plan was to create pigeon-guided missiles. The concept involved placing a pigeon inside the nose cone of a missile, where it would see the target on a small screen. The bird, having been trained to recognize the target, would peck at the screen to keep it centered, with its pecks physically steering the missile's fins. Incredibly, tests proved that the pigeons were disturbingly good at this. But eventually, the military decided that entrusting a sophisticated weapon of war to the pecking of a bird was just a step too far into insanity, and the project was scrapped for more conventional electronics. 11. While the Allies were busy with the Manhattan Project, unlocking the secrets of the atom, some of the highest-ranking Nazis were deep into some truly bizarre stuff. Heinrich Himmler's SS Ahnenerbe Institute was a prime example, wasting a fortune on expeditions to Tibet to find the mythical origins of the Aryan race. They seriously investigated hollow Earth theories, consulted with astrologers, and promoted crackpot ideas like world ice theory. This deep dive into occultism and junk science was a massive diversion of intellectual and financial resources that could have been used for, actual war-related research. It was like the villains from an Indiana Jones movie were genuinely in charge of national science policy. 12. The American Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, developed a weapon that wasn't designed to kill, but to humiliate. Codenamed Who Me? It was a pocket-sized atomizer filled with a chemical concoction that produced a powerful and long-lasting smell of, human feces. The plan was for resistance agents to sneak up on high-ranking German officers in public and give them a quick spray. The hope was that the intense social embarrassment and ridicule would completely shatter their authority and morale. It's a stunning example of weaponized immaturity, essentially a government-funded high-stakes prank designed to make your enemies smell like they had a terrible accident. 13. In one of the most creatively dumb plots ever conceived, the British Secret Service gave serious consideration to a plan to chemically feminize Adolf Hitler. The idea wasn't to poison him, but to secretly lace his food with doses of estrogen. Their working theory was that introducing female hormones into his system might pacify his aggressive personality, making him less of a warmonger. Perhaps they thought it would make him more open to peaceful negotiation, or just take the edge off his terrifying speeches. The sheer logistical nightmare of trying to spike the food of the world's most paranoid dictator aside, the entire concept was based on a magnificently flawed understanding of hormones and human psychology. 14. Your favorite orange soda, Fanta, has a surprisingly dark origin story. It was invented in Nazi Germany during World War II. When wartime trade embargoes cut off the supply of Coca-Cola syrup to German bottling plants, the head of Coca-Cola in Germany, a man named Max Keith, had to get creative to stay in business. He whipped up a new carbonated drink using whatever scraps he could find, which often included industrial leftovers like whey, the watery byproduct of cheese making, and apple pomace. He named his new creation Fanta, short for the German word for imagination. It's a true testament to wartime improvisation giving birth to a global brand. 15. The British sticky bomb was a desperate anti-tank weapon that was probably more dangerous to its user than to the enemy. In theory, it was simple: a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin, coated in an ultra-sticky resin and stuck on a handle. The soldier was supposed to run up to a German tank, pull a pin, and slap the bomb onto its armor. The problem was, the adhesive was famously bad at sticking to dirty or wet metal. You know, the conditions tanks are usually in, but it was exceptionally good at sticking to the soldier's own wool uniform. Imagine the pure, unadulterated terror of having a live grenade full of nitroglycerin glued to your own pants while you're trying to escape gunfire. 16. In a brilliant display of battlefield ingenuity, American soldiers found an incredible, if slightly awkward use for their standard-issue condoms, protecting their rifles. In the mud, rain, and sand of combat zones from the Pacific to Europe, a rifle barrel can easily get clogged with debris, which can cause a catastrophic malfunction. The simple, cheap, and completely waterproof solution was to stretch a condom over the muzzle of their weapon. This field-expedient hack kept their M1 Garands and other firearms clean and ready to fire at a moment's notice, proving that sometimes the best tool for the job is the one you'd least expect. 17. Operation Bernhard was the Nazis' grand plan to bring the British economy to its knees, and the forgery part was brilliant. They used Jewish prisoners with incredible printing skills in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp to create millions of pounds sterling in counterfeit banknotes. These fakes were so perfect they could fool bank cashiers. So, they had a mountain of perfect fake money. The dumb part? They had absolutely no idea how to actually use it. They couldn't figure out a way to inject such a massive amount of cash into the British system without immediately being caught. It was like planning the perfect bank heist, but forgetting to bring a getaway car. Most of the money was never even used and ended up being dumped in a lake in Austria after the war. 18. The Soviet Union's attempt at creating anti-tank dogs is a story of incredible cruelty and even more incredible stupidity. The plan was to train dogs, often by starving them, to seek food under tanks. Then, they would strap explosives to these dogs that would detonate when a lever was triggered by the tank's hull. The catastrophic flaw in this already horrific plan was in the training. They used their own Soviet tanks for the dogs to practice on. So when these terrified dogs were released onto a real battlefield surrounded by the unfamiliar noise and smell of German panzers, they did what they were trained to do. They ran straight back towards the familiar Soviet tanks, blowing them up instead. A truly brutal and self-defeating strategy. 19. In the 1950s and 60s, the U.S. Army secretly conducted experiments on its own citizens by spraying cities like St. Louis with chemicals, including zinc cadmium sulfide. The official story was that they were testing smokescreens to protect against a potential Soviet attack. However, the dumb and deeply sinister part is that they deliberately chose to spray these chemicals over low-income, predominantly black neighborhoods, without any public announcement or consent. They exposed thousands of people to substances that were later linked to serious health issues, including cancer. Calling this merely dumb is an understatement. It was a chilling violation of ethics and human rights, disguised as a national security drill. 20. As the war dragged on and Germany's resources dwindled, they made a decision that was both practical and deeply symbolic of their decline. They started minting coins out of zinc. While this saved more valuable metals like copper and nickel for the war effort, zinc is a terrible material for currency. It corrodes extremely easily, especially when handled. As a result, these wartime coins would quickly become dull, pitted, and sometimes would literally crumble in people's hands. It's hard to have confidence in your nation's economic might when the change in your pocket is actively disintegrating. It was a small but potent daily reminder that the Third Reich was rotting from the inside out. 21. France's famed Maginot Line was a monument to fighting the last war. It was an incredibly expensive and technologically advanced series of concrete fortifications designed to stop a German invasion cold. The only problem was, it was designed to stop the kind of invasion Germany launched in World War I. The line famously didn't cover the Ardennes forest, which the French generals arrogantly deemed impassable for tanks. It was also a static defense with poor anti-aircraft cover, which was useless against Germany's fast-moving blitzkrieg tactics. The Germans didn't bother attacking it head-on. They simply drove their tanks around it through the impassable forest. It was one of history's most expensive and useless walls. 22. The Allied Ghost Army was a masterclass in military deception that feels like it was pulled from a magic show. This top-secret unit, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, had one job: to fool the Germans. And they were amazing at it. They used an arsenal of inflatable rubber tanks and airplanes, powerful speakers that blasted the sounds of troop movements across the countryside, and fake radio chatter to create the illusion of massive armies where there were none. They even had actors dressed as generals wander around to sell the performance. They successfully tricked German intelligence into thinking major attacks were coming from the wrong places, playing a vital role in D-Day's success. They literally won battles using balloons and sound effects. 23. Not to be left behind in the race to weaponize confused animals, the United States developed Project X-Ray, better known as the Bat Bomb. The plan was as insane as it sounds. Capture millions of bats, attach tiny napalm bombs with timers to them, and then drop them from planes over Japanese cities. The theory was that the bats would roost in Japan's mostly wooden buildings and then, boom, widespread fiery chaos. The concept was actually proven to be effective during a test. A little too effective, in fact. During a trial run, some of the armed bats escaped, flew to the nearest buildings, which happened to be the American test facility, and promptly burned the entire base to the ground. 24. Finland's role in World War II was one of the strangest of the entire conflict. They fought alongside Nazi Germany, but they insisted on the title co-belligerents, not allies. Their only goal was to fight their common enemy, the Soviet Union, which had previously invaded them. Bizarrely, while fighting alongside the Wehrmacht, Finland steadfastly refused to adopt Nazi anti-Semitic policies. They protected their Jewish population, most of whom survived the war. They even had Jewish soldiers fighting in the Finnish army, which was technically on the same side as Germany. It was a morally complicated and deeply weird arrangement that defies easy explanation. 25. Project Habakkuk was one of the most brilliantly dumb ideas of the war. The plan? To build a massive 2-million-ton aircraft carrier not out of steel, but out of picrete, a super-strong mixture of wood pulp and ice. Proposed as an unsinkable, self-repairing floating fortress for the middle of the Atlantic, the concept was actually tested, and picrete proved to be incredibly durable. The project was ultimately scuttled not because the idea was impossible, but because it was thermodynamically idiotic. The sheer amount of steel and resources needed for the massive refrigeration plant to keep a giant iceberg from melting in the Atlantic would have been enough to build several conventional aircraft carriers. 26. Japan's infamous Unit 731 was responsible for unspeakable horrors. but some of their bioweapon concepts ventured into the territory of the absurdly complex. One of their grand ideas involved creating ceramic bombs, filled not with explosives, but with plague-infected fleas. The plan was to drop these bombs over Chinese cities, where they would shatter and release a cloud of tiny, disease-carrying insects. Setting aside the sheer evil of the concept, the logistical and biological nightmare of breeding, infecting, storing, and successfully deploying millions of fleas via aerial bombing is just staggering. It was a plan that combined James Bond villainy with the practical planning of a Saturday morning cartoon. 27. Straight from the British SOE's Department of Diabolical Ideas, we have the exploding rat. The plan was pure, simple genius. Agents would take dead rats, stuff them with plastic explosives, sew them back up, and hide them in the coal piles of German factories and railways. An unsuspecting worker would then shovel the rat into a boiler, causing a massive explosion. The dumb part? The very first shipment of these weaponized rodents was intercepted by the Germans. But this failure led to an accidental success. The discovery created mass paranoia, forcing the Germans to launch a nationwide hunt for suspicious-looking rat corpses, wasting countless man-hours on what was essentially a countrywide pest inspection. 28. In the heat of battle, how do you quickly distinguish an enemy plane from a friendly one? The US military's answer, in part, was playing cards. They produced special decks of cards where each card featured the silhouette of an Allied or Axis aircraft to help soldiers with memorization. While it might have been a decent study tool during downtime, just imagine the sheer absurdity of trying to use this in a real combat situation. Hold fire, men. Let me just check my deck. Is that a Messerschmitt on the Jack of Spades or a Focke-Wulf on the Ten of Clubs? It's a classic example of a training aid that is utterly useless when the pressure is actually on. 29. The Japanese I-400 class submarines were technological marvels, essentially the world's first underwater aircraft carriers. They were the largest submarines built until the nuclear age, each capable of carrying 3 attack planes in a watertight hangar and launching them from a catapult on its deck. After the war, the US Navy captured these incredible machines and studied them intensely. But as the Cold War began to brew, paranoia took over. Fearing that this advanced technology might fall into Soviet hands, the US Navy made the dumb decision to deliberately sink these technological masterpieces in deep water off the coast of Hawaii, sending a priceless piece of engineering history to the bottom of the ocean. 30. Benito Mussolini's decision to enter World War II is a textbook example of terrible timing and massive overconfidence. In June 1940, seeing France on the verge of collapse, he thought he could jump into the war at the last minute and snag some easy territory from the winnings. He wanted a seat at the victor's table without really having to fight for it. The only problem was that the Italian military was a complete mess, poorly equipped, badly trained, and terribly led. They immediately suffered humiliating defeats in Greece and North Africa, forcing Hitler to divert German troops to bail them out. Instead of a powerful ally, Mussolini turned Italy into a massive strategic liability for the Axis. 31. The Germans, known for their engineering, once built a meticulously detailed fake airfield in Holland entirely out of wood. It had wooden planes, wooden hangars, wooden fuel trucks, the works. It was designed to trick Allied bombers into wasting their payloads on a worthless target. British intelligence saw through it immediately. But instead of just ignoring it, they decided to respond with one of the greatest and most humiliating trolls in military history. They sent a single, lone bomber, which flew over the pristine wooden airfield and dropped one single, non-explosive bomb made entirely of wood, reportedly with the words "wood for wood" painted on its side. 32. In the early, desperate days of the German invasion, the Soviet Red Army was so short on modern equipment that they sometimes had to rely on a piece of technology from the Russian Civil War. The Tachanka? This was, quite literally, a horse-drawn farm cart with a heavy machine gun mounted on the back. These incredibly vulnerable, horse-powered gun platforms were sent into battle against the German Blitzkrieg's modern tanks, artillery, and aircraft. It was a tragic and desperate symbol of how unprepared the Soviet Union was for the initial onslaught, pitting 19th-century cavalry tactics against a 20th-century mechanized army. We've covered everything from exploding rats to psychic warfare, but the archives of human absurdity are truly bottomless. We know for a fact that there are even more insane stories buried in history. So here's your mission. What is the single dumbest, most unbelievable WW2 fact that we completely failed to mention? Go to war in the comments and show us what we missed. And if you enjoy having your view of history shattered, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.